Good evening, America. On Friday, The Economist published a piece that rippled through Europe's policy circles, because it dared to do something rare: speak rationally about China's trade surplus without the usual ideological haze. But let's be clear from the outset, this article is not pro-China. The Economist represents the Western establishment, and its long-standing skepticism toward Beijing, the Communist Party, and Xi Jinping's economic model is well documented. The reason this article matters to an American audience is different. It exposes a deeper truth: Europe may be misdiagnosing China's surplus, and in doing so, sabotaging its own strategic interests. The headline number: $1 trillion. China is running a trade surplus close to $1 trillion in goods alone. That figure is so massive it eclipses the GDP of most countries on Earth. Out of 180-plus nations, only 19 have economies larger than $1 trillion. China's surplus, by itself, exceeds the economic output of nearly the entire world map. No wonder it makes headlines. No wonder politicians panic. President Macron warned that persistent trade imbalances are unsustainable. The IMF urged China to fix its economic distortions. European manufacturers, unions, and bureaucrats frame the surplus as proof that China is draining global demand and destabilizing world markets. It sounds dramatic. It sounds threatening. But the Economist argument was this: the number looks terrifying, but the real economic mechanics tell a different story, and the West is misreading them at its own peril. 1. The surplus ignores services. Where China loses the $1 trillion counts physical goods only: cars, appliances, electronics, steel, solar panels, batteries. It does not include services. China runs a services deficit, meaning Chinese firms and consumers spend heavily on Western auditing, banking, legal services, consulting, insurance, software licensing, cloud infrastructure, and international finance. If you include services, the surplus drops by about $180 billion instantly. That's nearly a 20% haircut right there. So the first warning for Washington and Wall Street is obvious: don't build trade war strategy on incomplete data. It leads to self-inflicted wounds. 2. The biggest winners in China are Western multinationals. Here's the part European politicians whisper but rarely admit aloud. The trade data also excludes in-country transactions inside Chinese free trade zones where Western multinationals operate factories and sell into China without the goods technically crossing customs borders. Those profits, brand value, IP royalties, equity gains, shareholder returns, ultimately flow back to Western corporate balance sheets, not Beijing. Apple, Tesla, Intel, Qualcomm, Samsung, Nike, Volkswagen, Goldman Sachs, Deloitte, JP Morgan. These companies earn more from China's domestic economy than China earns from exporting to Europe. So The Economist argues the monster surplus would shrink by another 40% if you counted all the value correctly. Value the West quietly pockets. That leads to the second strategic point for the US. China's surplus doesn't mean China is winning capitalism. It means Western firms are monetizing China's manufacturing machine while Beijing absorbs the political blame. 3. Relative to GDP, China's surplus isn't even extreme. China's surplus is about 3.4% of its GDP. The IMF says 45 economies have larger surplus to GDP ratios than China, 8 of them inside the European Union. So in proportional terms, China is not an outlier. It just has scale. And scale triggers psychological threat inflation. For Americans, this is familiar terrain. We debate China's dominance, but the data shows something subtler. China's surplus is not a strategic anomaly. It's a byproduct of Europe losing industrial competitiveness. 4. The surplus is recycled into Western assets. Critics claim China refuses to buy enough imports. Wrong question. China doesn't hoard dollars. It recycles them into U.S. treasuries, corporate equity, overseas loans, and direct investment. In exchange for shipping goods today, Beijing acquires claims on future Western output tomorrow. Trade is a time-shifted exchange, not a same-day barter. For the U.S., this means China is underwriting Western debt markets even while Europe lectures it on imbalance. 5. Right now, America needs deflation more than it fears surplus. After 2022, the Fed raised rates aggressively to fight inflation. Mortgage rates are still high. Credit is tight. Consumers feel it. Supply chains are strained. Manufacturing can't scale overnight. In that environment, China exports price stability, cheap goods, predictable supply, massive capacity. Ironically, The Economist says this acts as a disinflationary shock absorber for the West. America battles inflation. China battles deflation. For now, the systems counterbalance, and that balance helps the West more than Beijing. 6. Europe's real crisis isn't trade. It's irrelevance. The true economic threat in 2025 is this. European manufacturers can no longer compete with China's auto sector or electronics firms, even if China's surplus disappeared tomorrow. If Europe forces China to buy more imports, sure, the surplus shrinks. But Europe still loses the car market, the battery race, the appliance aisle, the semiconductor supply chain, and the pricing power. So the final takeaway for the US is stark and strategic. Blaming China's surplus is a distraction. The real fight is industrial competitiveness, and Europe is losing it while mislabeling the scoreboard. Final message for America: this article wasn't written to save China. It was written to save Europe from its own strategic incompetence, from turning a competition crisis into a misframed trade crusade that fixes nothing and damages the West instead. For Washington, Wall Street, and American industry, the lesson is clear. Misjudge the surplus, and the West, not China, pays the price. That's all for today. Thank you for watching. If you found this analysis valuable, subscribe for more breakdowns on global economics and strategic power shifts.